Yo. Okay. Let me see. Can people hear me? Let's see. Cool. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. Mm-hmm. Yo. Hello? Okay, cool. So we're gonna wait for people to come in, and we'll see what's going on. So this is History 114. We'll be doing the study guide session for like 20 minutes today. We don't need to do too long, just because there hasn't been much going on in the class recently in terms of new readings and content. So I think it was a good idea to go over some of the notes that went in class, because he kind of briefly went over them. We're probably going to go over them more in class tomorrow, but we'll see what's up. So after today, we'll see what's good. But yeah, nothing too much going on right now. But yeah. Hope y'all having a good one. We'll probably be trying to maybe do the streams earlier from now on, because make sure the attendance goes up, because we're not sure if 9:30 p.m. works, or could be a little late. But yeah, we'll be doing that, and feel free to send your questions in as well. Mhm. Cool. So we'll start off, and we'll see as people come in. Oh, connection is unstable. Let me get a little closer. I'm gonna actually move to the kitchen. Maybe that'll stabilize the connection. So let me hold up. Let me do that real quick. Yeah, this should help a little bit. Okay, where were we? Okay. Okay, so History 114. Sitting on something. Hold up. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be working on History 114. So since we didn't really have that much readings going on, we're going to go over the Shays. We're going to go over the constitutionality that leads to the Northwest Ordinance, pretty much. How did the American Revolution lead to different policies on how slaves were essentially going to be treated in the new country that is now the United States? So, as most of you know, 1776, you get the Declaration of Independence. So that's when you get these states who now declare their independence from Britain. That's cool and all. But the big problem is now you have a new government. And in 1777, you get the Articles of Confederation. That's essentially the first constitution of the United States. The thing is that the Articles of Confederation has a very weak central government. It defines what the legislative branch is, defines the executive branch, it defines the judicial branch. Great things, right? The thing is, almost everything's to the states. You know, there's some taxes and stuff they can do and stuff, but for the most part, the federal government doesn't have much power. States really are like their own thing. So this is kind of a problem because in 1777 you get the Articles of Confederation, and 1781 is when most of the states actually ratify it, because a good amount were on board, but it doesn't get really ratified until 81. So the problem is now that there's a lot of debt after the war, and Alexander Hamilton, this guy who is essentially a Federalist, really wants to take the debt off the states and put it to the federal government. That's fine and all, but the problem is the South has paid most of their debt off. So here's the thing. If you paid off your debt and you're in the South, and then the government takes all the debt, which most of the northern states have not paid yet, and makes it federal debt. When you pay taxes, the federal government's going to use your tax money to pay for this debt. So a bunch of Southerners are like, so I paid my debt, and you're telling me to pay you taxes to pay the debt of the northern nations. And you're like, hell no. Just because they don't want to pay doesn't mean I get to pay for them. I'm not having it. And here's a big thing though. So there's a big issue with that. A big negotiation was that let me see, Federalist, was that the DC one? Was that the compromise for DC? Yeah. So a big thing that Alexander Hamilton did was to make up for the fact that the South was going to pay for essentially northern taxes. They moved the capital to Washington, D.C. I believe it was first in Philadelphia, then now it got moved to Washington, D.C. And now that's how the capital got there. The Articles of Confederation. So what happened is that all this taxation to kind of pay off all this debt causes big problems, especially with farmers. So all these farmers who can't pay off their own debts because they're getting taxed all this stuff and are about to lose their property essentially fight back and be like, hey, we can't afford all this crap. So can you please help us out? Federal government's like, sorry, babe, can't do it. So it gets so bad that right before farmers are about to lose their property to all these people who own all their debt, they're the creditors. Creditors are the people you owe stuff to, and a debtor is the person who owes the stuff. So all these creditors, before they come in and take all the stuff, they actually take arms and start burning down some stuff. Essentially, shooting at anyone who's trying to take property, and then shooting down the creditors or burning down the creditors' houses. And that's what constitutes the Shays Rebellion in 1787. So it happened in Massachusetts before the federal government could constitutionally act on it, because the Articles of Confederation doesn't say anything about how they can act on it. It's still a state issue. Massachusetts is going crazy, so the government's kind of like, we can't really do anything because we don't have the power. The Articles of Confederation are pretty weak. They don't let you do anything. So here's the thing, though. So they managed to get it done. I think George Washington leads an army, kind of separates it, and they do bring it down. But the problem with the Shays Rebellion was that after the Shays Rebellion, it kind of showed how weak the Articles of Confederation were. Because after that happens, everyone's like, no, we need to do something about this, because that was just nonsense how that essentially happened. People were not very happy about how things went down. So now with the Shays Rebellion, let me see. And remember, Shays Rebellion, a little more context for that. A lot of it started with trade wars with states with contradictory laws. So a lot of these states were not working with each other. So the federal government couldn't do anything about it. States don't like each other. They don't like each other. And the Shays Rebellion, the leader was Daniel Shay. And and James Madison even said Shays Rebellion would decide the federal government policy forever. And George Washington rode into Philly in 1789, 2 years after Shays Rebellion, to sworn as the president. And he very much is very aware of what's happening with Shays Rebellion because he was there. Now you get the Whiskey Rebellion, which happens. Let's see, Whiskey Rebellion. Give me 1 segundo. Where the hell did I put the Whiskey Rebellion? 1 second. Okay, cool. So after that, essentially what you get in 1788 is the actual Constitution that says that the federal government can do a lot more stuff. So in 1788, you get the Constitution was essentially the Connecticut Plan, which established 2 houses of Congress and our current central representation. And within that plan, you kind of got the plan to, let's see. Before I do that, let me make sure I'm doing Whiskey Rebellion. What was that? Whiskey Rebellions, beginning 1791. Great. So in 1788, a year after the Shay Rebellion, you get all these people who are worried, and then a bunch of people come together in 1788 and essentially create the Connecticut Plan called the Great Compromise, which established 2 houses of Congress and made all these different things. But here's the thing, though. The new Constitution in 1788 has humongous amounts of power for the federal government, and they can actually do stuff like federal laws actually supersede the states. And that's pretty big because later on you're going to see how that causes a very, very big deal. Here's the thing, though. There was 3 compromises on top of that. It was the Slave Fugitive Act, and that one essentially said that if a slave goes into Northern Territory, a slave goes into Northern Territory, that the slave owner can come and get his slave back even though he's in free land. There's the 3/5 compromise, which pretty much counted against these slave owners wanted their slaves to be counted as people, but the Northerners were like, you can't do that because you see them as property. You can't just see them as humans as well. So the 3/5 pretty much says, okay, for every 5 white men, we'll count 3 black people as, I'll say slaves or African American slaves as people. And that's what the 3/5 compromise is for tax issues. So that helps them raise their population and deal with taxes. And there's the slave trade ban, but that's not going to happen until 1808. So they let the international slave trade go until 1808. And after that, pretty much a bunch of people try to smuggle in slaves to the Caribbean and Cuba, Jamaica, all that good stuff. So great. That's another thing. So 1788 is pretty important. So when you get Whiskey Rebellion, like in 1791, they have the complete power to destroy stuff. So George Washington comes with his army in 1791 against the Whiskey Rebellion, and the big thing is that they were putting more taxes under, I think, Alexander Hamilton needed more taxes to pay for these things. He taxed the grain, and he was taxing essentially by taxing grains and also taxing essentially whiskey. And when they taxed the whiskey, the big problem was that now these farmers who are barely any making money on these grain are now have to deal with that. But now, so they start uprising as well and are very angry. But now George Washington comes in with the new constitutional powers and just wrecks that place. So it was very good sign that that was going to go down. So essentially, what happens now? So in 1787, you get the Northwest Ordinance. This happens a year before the Constitution. The slave states, essentially, Northwest Ordinance of 1787 says that the slave states south of Ohio and east of Mississippi, those are the slave states. If you're south of Ohio and east of Mississippi River, you're a slave state. That's cool. But if you're north of Ohio and west of the Mississippi, you're a non-slave state. No slaves. But there's some things, like I said, the 1793 Fugitive Act, Slave Act, is essentially that allowed slaves who run to the non-slave states. Your slave master can, if he shows proof that he owns you, he can take you back. And the Bill of Rights, which would happen later, essentially was needed because a lot of states were wondering how, if the federal government's going to be so strong, how are they going to limit power on that? So let's look at Bill of Rights. Okay, and that was in 1791. So the Constitution of 1788. Called the ratifying convention special by the Constitutional Convention, observing Constitution Day. So I believe it's in 1780. On June, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify, and it was substantially agreed. Cool. So 1788 and 89 is pretty important because those are the years the Constitution goes up. And the Northwest Ordinance happens a year before. So you go Northwest Ordinance 1787, Constitution 1788-89. A few years later is the 1793 Fugitive Slave Act. And that essentially makes it so that you can't just run to the north and be gone. So yeah, that's a really good one. And 1808 is when the international slave trade ends, but essentially people try to sneak it into the Caribbean through, and that's what Amistad is, the smuggling of Africans to Cuba, Jamaica, then to the United States. People were fabricating papers, all this good stuff. Yeah, and 1819 was the legal case. So the Constitution. And let's see. And you get a few other cases as well that help out with these constitutional law. But before I go into that, a big thing you need to know is that we're going to switch gears into Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, because these are the people who did the Federalist Papers to support the Constitution. Essentially, if it wasn't for these three guys, the 1788-89 Constitution would not have been a big thing, because they were the big Federalist guy. They want big power. They want big federal government. And the anti-Fed said that they would like to rule like a monarchy. So the anti-Federalists are like Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the followers, Sam Adams. So essentially, they were very much not cool with it. And James Madison was the guy who proposed that we should do a Bill of Rights to go in with that as a compromise. He wasn't cool. James Madison wasn't cool with it, but he was like, we have to do this if we want people. So a lot of it's built on compromise. So as a reminder, George Washington came to presidency in 1789. So same year as pretty much the Constitution made him the president. And you get the capital at first, Philadelphia, then to New York, which was the Constitution. And after that, to make amends, it was finally put in D.C. because, they need to appease for the South. So Bill of Rights 1791, the first 9 are individual rights, so they help out people, freedom of speech and whatnot. And the 10th Amendment helps states' rights to take care of the non-federal jurisdiction matters. So if the federal government doesn't specifically tackle it, it's pretty much a state issue. If it's not included in the Constitution, it's a state issue. They have power. They don't have to follow certain laws. And a big thing is that during the Alien Sedition Act, this is like in Alien Sedition Act. What was this thing? Alien Sedition Act. Sorry, guys. Gotta find this real quick. Alien Sedition Act. Where are you? You had it. Oh, yeah, 1798. Alien Sedition Act of 1798. So, potentially, John Adams, who was the president after George Washington, does not like that the Federalists are being attacked by the anti-Federalists. They're putting all the stuff out. Thomas Jefferson is talking smack about them. And essentially, John Adams has the Alien Sedition Act, which makes it so like, hey, you can't talk smack about the government or that's a crime. So essentially, you get this thing from Revolution. Where's that alien? So it would be the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions that Thomas Jefferson would do. That would be a big critique on the Alien Sedition Act, and they use the 10th Amendment to really support them to make sure that they didn't do this. So that was a big way of making sure that the Federalists couldn't just rule over and take over. The Anti-Federalists stopped them from essentially censoring everyone. So yeah, and the revolution in 1800, it truly felt like it was a revolution because John Adams and Thomas Jefferson ran for office, and Thomas Jefferson won, and people saw that as them finally winning because those people who were going for the Federalists, they're considered like monarchists by these people. They're like, they want to rule with like with big government. That's not cool. And Thomas Jefferson believed in the spirit of the people. And so, yeah, essentially, that's how you get Thomas Jefferson, who very much is a fan of the people, not big on federal government. But the thing is that the whole point of this argument is that we see how slavery has sort of changed a bit because now it's like almost split. We always have like 7 free states, 7 non-free states. This is after I think they make Vermont, if I'm sure, the founding of Vermont. So yeah, essentially now you have the slavery being okay in essentially the South and the West, and not okay in the North and the East. But there's a lot of people profiting off slavery in the South because all this industry that's going to be happening in the North and West later. So you got to keep an eye on that. And Thomas Jefferson wasn't the most, he was pretty racist, He had the Thoughts on the State of Virginia. I think he wrote that a few years either after or before his presidency, and he's essentially talking about how like he doesn't see Africans or blacks as capable of like mental capacity, that like they're just like not even, they're like evolved from a different species of human, like somewhere behind. So it's like pretty racist stuff. So at the end of the day, it's going to be like, hey, Thomas Jefferson, like he's not going to be the most progressive guy in his administration when it comes to like slavery and stuff. He does actually get rid of the Alien Sedition Act. He does have some states do sort of reconcile some differences, but overall, Thomas Jefferson, he's not going to be the champion to slavery, him both as a slave owner and whatnot. So I'm going to pretty much end it there for now. I know it was kind of a crash course and went a little over the place, but essentially, there's not really much going on right now. You have the different years going on. And there are some stuff in the other PowerPoints, but I recommend you read them. Feel free to tell me if you want to do things. We might talk a bit tomorrow after class. Like I said, it's after the midterms, so not too much to talk about. Thank you. Let me know if you like the video. I know there's not too many people who came in today, but let me know if this video was helpful. This is essentially a review of the notes and understanding how the American Revolution and the Constitution affected slavery. And the big thing I remember is 3/5 compromise, which is essentially counting three slaves for every 5 white men. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which pretty much separated the free and the non-free states. And then you finally get 3/5 compromise, 1787, and the Fugitive Slave Act, which says if they run from south to north, or like they go from non-free to free states, the slaveholder can still bring them back if they can prove it. They're not automatically free once they walk there. So that's pretty important. So thank you very much. Let me know if you need anything else or if I have any questions. But thank you. Have a good one. We'll see you all tomorrow.